Hello, welcome to Federalism and the Virus, our review of the issue of federalism. You may recall a couple weeks ago we did a review of supply and demand through Corona. Fortunately for us, the coronavirus is giving us a perfect example to review the key concepts of federalism, the ultimate conflict between federal or national government power and state or local authority. So, for those of you who were here in August and remember August, this will be really familiar to you because we talked about this in our video Constitution and the USA. And we talked about it in a variety of other formats. We talked about the issue of um, federal and state power. And so we're going to do a quick review of federal and state power and then connect it to the issue of the virus today. So remember, the ultimate question for the coronavirus at the moment is who's in charge of the emergency response? Is it the states and the local authorities, or is it the federal government? Um, you guys might remember a couple of key terms. Federalism is a way of organizing a nation so that two or more levels of government have formal authority over the land and people, what's called dual sovereignty, when we talk about the federal power and state powers. This is a good example of intergovernmental relations. This is the working of the federal system, the interactions between national, state, and local governments. And we also want to remember some key terms that will come up later is something called devolution, which is the passing down of responsibility to the states and the removal of authority from the federal government. So, why did we do federalism in the first place? Remember, it was a compromise between the large and the small states. The size of the United States, even at that time, which only extended to the Mississippi River, is that it makes it impractical to do direct democracy, which everyone votes on every issue. And so federalism is a more practical response. It also allows more direct access to the government in terms of people seeing their local governments and city councils, seeing people going to their state governments, and then eventually electing representatives to the federal government. It also works well in the United States, where we have many political subcultures, whether it's races, wealth, religious affiliations, ages, sexual preferences, etc. So this is why the United States engaged in a system called federalism. You might remember that the federal choice is one that not all governments have made, right? The federal system is where power is divided between the central government and states, and each one has their own separate sphere of influence. Whereas in a unitary government, it's a strong central government, and local government have and only have the powers give them to the central government. So local powers can only do what the central government tells them to do. And in a confederal state, there's strong states powers, and the federal government can only do what the states tell them to do. This is nice. When you take a look at this, by the way, you'll see that as I presented this, it's pretty difficult to see the entire screen, but that's okay. We're going live. We're not coming back. So, moving on. You might remember that there are federal and unitary systems all around the world. Great Britain has a unitary system. The United States has a federal system. A lot of other countries have their own systems. You can look at them for yourselves. All of this comes about from the Constitution. And remember, in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, there were enumerated powers. Enumerated powers were those ones that the Constitution specifically gave to the federal government. For example, you can borrow money, you can tax, you can coin money, you can regulate commerce, you can declare war. Those are the things that the Constitution thought it was important that the federal government be able to do. Now, there are also some implied powers. Because of the express powers, if you have a power to lay and collect taxes, then that must mean you should be able to punish tax evaders or regulate or license some commodities or goods, such as alcohol, whiskey, for those of you who are Hamiltonian fans, and outlaw the use of others, such as narcotics. And given all that, we have this cool Hillsdalian Venn diagram. This is familiar to some of you, I know. Delegated, shared, and reserved powers, right? And so in the federal system, there are powers that are delegated to the national government. And you see on the left, one of those examples is coin money. Another one is declare war. Find another one. Nice. They also have powers that the state government are reserved to the state government. For example, taxing or controlling public education, protecting public health and safety. Spoiler alert, that's going to come in handy later in the screencast. And of course, you have concurrent powers. Concurrent powers are things that you share, concurrent with current. They are going on at the same time. For example, there are federal troops and state troops. There are the National Guard. There are local police forces. So the maintaining law and order is an example of federal and local control. Both state and federal government charge taxes. Charge sounds like a fee. They've called them all fees now. They can levy taxes. They can borrow money. They can take land for public use. They can provide for the public welfare. Again, spoiler alert, that's going to come in handy at the end of our lecture. And of course, a variety of other things. So we remember how and why this came about. Briefly, it was the Articles of Confederation that were basically more power to the states, very weak power for the centralized government, and nobody could get anything done, and states hated each other. Connecticut was always fighting with Rhode Island. Rhode Island was always insulting Massachusetts. Massachusetts just thought they were better than everybody else. So, in terms of the constitutional basis for federalism, states' obligations to each other, full faith and credit. Every state must recognize the official documents and judges from other states. There are privileges and immunities. Citizens of each state have the privileges of citizens of other states. And there's such a thing called extradition. States must return a person charged with crimes in another state to that state for punishment. That's why all those things put together is if you're married in one state, you're married in another state. If you have a driver's license in one state, that driver's license works in a different state. If you have a hunting license, you have a hunting, well, who knows? So those are examples of why federalism works going from state to state. You guys remember we talked about it. This is an old statistic. There were like 98,000 types of governments in the United States, right? We have one U.S. government, 50 state governments, and a whole bunch of counties, municipalities, townships, school districts, etc. Um, wow, some advantages and disadvantages for the concept of federalism. Um, Advantages increases access to government. You can access government at any level. There are local problems that can be solved locally. No one cares about the eucalyptus trees in Mount Davidson in Atlanta, Georgia, but a lot of people in San Francisco City Council or in the San Francisco Rainforest Alliance, it's not a rainforest, Forest Alliance, might care about that. It's hard for political parties or interest groups to dominate all politics. The Green Party can't be strong everywhere, just most of the places. On the other hand, we have some disadvantages for democracy. States have different levels of service. California spends way less proportionally on education for its students than a lot of other states do. There are other states that may have increased access to certain services, whether it's abortion or marriage or Planned Parenthood or those sorts of things. Local interests can counteract national interests. So while there may be a strong national interest to shelter in place, maybe there are some local businesses that have no interest in doing so. And of course, there's just too many levels of government, and there's just too much money spent by government services in general because of all this redundancy and overlapping of government responsibility. Um, you may remember, of course, that the federal government can tell states what to do. We'll get to this in greater detail in a minute, through a variety of things. But one of the most common is an unfunded mandate, where they make states follow certain rules, usually based on the Bill of Rights and the rights that are outlined in the Constitution, whether it's the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection and due process, or any number of other Bills of Rights amendments. For example, the Age Discrimination Act of 1986, Safe Drinking Water Act, Clean Air Act, all of those, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, all of those are good examples of unfunded mandates where the federal government has told states, you need to comply with these rules, and it's up to you, and you have to use your own money in terms of how you're going to do that. Um, hey, do you remember we talked about different types of federalism? I'm going to give you a cake metaphor later. We talked about dual federalism a long time ago, where we have the national government concerns itself with developing and disposing of public lands, currency issues, foreign trade, internal improvements like the interstate railroad. And the state government is the most important government for citizens. It regulates and promotes local commerce, provides for public health and protection, domestic legislation, and conducting the police. You guys remember what kind of cake that is? Two separate layers. Yes, indeed. That was layer cake. Think of a layer cake right now. Layer cake. Is it a yellow cake with chocolate frosting? Is it a chocolate cake with raspberry frosting? Is it a chocolate cake with white frosting? Is it a red velvet cake? What kind of cake? Is it a strawberry cake with lemon citrus strawberry filling? What kind of layer cake are you thinking of right now? Take a moment. Fantastic. That's dual federalism. Now, folks, we remember cooperative federalism at times like the Great Depression. Some of the people are referring now to the Great Lockdown. We remember, of course, the 2008 Great Recession. Stay tuned for more economic lessons and stories around the Great Lockdown. When states could not handle the problems of the economic crash in 1932, the federal government, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the New Deal, with superior taxing and borrowing power, stepped in to manage the economy. And states had to follow federal guidelines and federal regulations. That's cooperative federalism. You might think of it as where both layers get mixed together in kind of a yellow cake, chocolate cake kind of mix of crazy goodness. What was the name of that kind of cake? Marble cake. You're right. Think of your favorite marble cake right now, if you can. Usually, when I think of marble cake, I think of a bunt pan, bundt, a bunt cake, which has the ability to marble things more easily. You may think of a bunt cake also. Of course, now in the last 40 years, which is when I've been alive, there's something called new federalism, often referred to as on your own federalism, double quotation marks, air quotes, where the baby bird is getting kicked out of the nest by the tough love robin mother who's saying, fly away, child, fly to the future, where the power is devolving from national to state governments in terms of deregulation, but it's also increased the difficulty of states being able to fund and to comply with all of these kinds of mandates. And remember, devolution, passing down responsibilities from the national government to the states, requires the national government to relinquish power. This is all going to be so good in just a minute. Now, remember, the states can compel governments and the federal government can compel states and others to do things with your favorite thing in mind, money. Oh, you thought I was going to say happiness or love, didn't you? No, money, in which they can give grants to state and local programs. There are a variety of grants. We talked about the variety of grants last September. We won't go into them now. But the federal government can give funding, so that gives them a voice and a power and a say in what the states are able to do, or to convince the states to do certain things that may come into play later on as well. And we talk about, oh, hey, forgot, we are going to talk about these types of grants, categorical grants for specific purposes, school lunches, construction jobs, ventilators, personal protective equipment, masks, etc. Then are the broad block grants, where there are less guidelines and a few strings attached, healthcare, social services, funding for hiring more nurses, hiring more doctors, hiring more social services, and then project grants, specifically maybe related to the coronavirus or job training or furloughing people. Now, this is cool. What happened here? Fascinating. This slide looks weird. If we remember that there are two big conflicts, I'm going to take a moment and see if I can bust this out. Check this out, folks. I'm going to bust this out and take a look at this one right here. Can you see? Yes, you can. That there are some examples of, maybe you can't see this. No, that was just my fault. It just doesn't work. So my apologies. The slideshow is just messed up. There are two conflicts between the issue of federalism. One is the 10th Amendment, which says that any power not given to the federal government is reserved for the states alone. The second is, on the federal government side, the Supremacy Clause and the Elastic Clause. Remember, the Supremacy Clause says federal law trumps state law, no pun intended. And the Elastic Clause, which is stretchy, says Congress can make any laws it needs to enact its enumerated powers. It's necessary and proper. It says Congress can pass any law it needs to, and we talked about those implied powers, in order to collect taxes or to regulate interstate commerce. Speaking of interstate commerce, take a look at that right down here where it says interstate commerce. You guys remember from our video the case of Wickard v. Filburn, where the guy was growing wheat for his own use on his own farm during the Great Depression. And the Supreme Court and others said that Wickard could not do that because indirectly it was still affecting the price of interstate wheat, which was going across state lines. And so you cannot just grow something for your own good if it is conflicting with federal law. Remember, our video also discussed the issue of guns in Montana, medical marijuana in California, toilet regulations, overflow, low flow toilets, and a lot of other things that we could think of when it comes to the issue of interstate commerce and the tension between the 10th Amendment, which reserves powers to the states, and the Supremacy Clause and the Elastic Clause, which reserves powers to the federal government. Now, when it comes to the virus, we have dealt with a whole lot of issues that relate perfectly to the issue of federalism. Who can issue shelter-in-place orders? Federal government, the cities, local municipalities, counties, states. Who can lift them? We'll talk about President Trump's order to have total authority to lift and reopen the country. Who is responsible for supplies of personal protective equipment or ventilators? We will take a look at the issue of what is the strategic pharmaceutical reserve and whose job is it for preparing for these? Is it the states? President Trump has asserted before that the states have responsibility for gathering supplies and preparing for a disaster. The strategic fund reserve for pharmaceuticals and ventilators and masks, and the National Board of Health has suggested otherwise. Wording was changed on their website now to say that it's up to the states to do it first, and the federal government is there to back up or support. Other than that, before that, it was the federal government's responsibility to prepare for things that states can't reasonably prepare for. So it'll be interesting to see how things change during this crisis. You might remember we also took a look at the brief introduction to the issue of Hurricane Katrina and who's responsible for preparing for and responding to a disaster of that sort. It's a very similar situation. Can the president order companies to make masks and ventilators? You'll see an article that deals with the Defense Production Act from the Cold War, the early 1950s, in which the president can order companies, much like they ordered car manufacturers to start making tanks and planes during World War II, to make things like masks and ventilators. Who is responsible for preparing for public health crises? Who is responsible for the job of getting ready for the next big event? Is it each individual state? Is it the Center for Disease Control? Is it the national government? Is there a task force? There was a task force to deal with pandemics that was shuttered several years ago. Who is responsible for preparing for public health crises? And who should take the lead in responding to them at that point? In other words, is the National Guard or the U.S. military supposed to be mobilized? Is it up to local leaders to enlist the National Guard or the militia, or to prepare in terms of state and local responders in responding to certain situations and emergency crises? And you're going to take a look at those in greater detail. To give you an example of the kinds of issues and articles we're going to be talking about, SF Gate, several weeks ago, talking with the mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, was discussing the initial shelter-in-place rule from March 16th. And she was quoted here as saying, we don't want to get to a point where we have to close down everything in order to get people to comply. We know that people need fresh air. They need to get out with their families they live with. But when you are adding friends and you're having meetups, you're not doing what we've asked you to do by social distancing with people who are not a part of your household. You're putting lives in danger. Remember, that was in response to people's first weekend of social distancing when everyone went out to the parks instead of hanging out. That connects then to the issue then, if we are going to issue shelter-in-place orders, to what extent does the president's executive power, the bully pulpit, help corroborate or contradict local orders? Remember, much was made at the end of March when President Trump said he wanted to see packed churches on Easter Sunday. The mayor of San Francisco responded by, why are we still listening to the president? We demonstrated we have to jump in and make this work without government support. The federal government just isn't moving fast enough. Is that, this is a pull out aside now, is that a question then of the ability to respond? Is the federal government a large ocean-going steamship that is slow, steamship, that's an old reference, isn't it? That's slow to turn and slow to respond? Are local and state governments more nimble, more flexible, the yacht catamaran America's Cup speed cruiser of response? It's a good question. And then if you look at the slide again, it also goes on to talk about the idea of acquiring more hospital beds, ensuring properties that city hospitals are prepared. And again, it continues to talk about the ability to use social distancing to mitigate the public need for excessive demand of public healthcare services. Um, so when you're going to take a look at the next segment of the document, the Canvas link to the directions, you're going to see links to several different articles. Your job is going to be to read 3 of those articles, to pick 3 to read, write a summary of them, find a new article that's up to date about this issue of federalism, the federal government versus state government. And then you're going to write your own response. There's a prompt there that will ask you to discuss, what do you think is the proper responsibility? How should power and authority be shared? I'm going to ask you to make a claim and to back up your argument with evidence from at least 3 sources that you found. It could be the 3 ones you've read, or the 4th one that you've looked up, or your own information as well. And you're going to make that, write that on a document. You're going to put into the link where it's going to ask you to make a copy, and then you're going to submit that online. That concludes our Federalism and the Virus review. Hopefully that was explanatory and sets you up for the issues of the current issue of virus and federalism. And if you have questions, we'll be hosting some meetings, conferences, hangouts, and Zooms to discuss the issues and to answer questions. Until then, have a good day.